Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Case of the Jills. Slightly different format this week. I have a friend with me today. So you've heard me talk before about some of the research on exercise and about how much exercise is actually needed to take care of our mental health. And we talked last week about the GEM project and the idea of doing a constellation of different things in order to help our mental health, especially now. So if you remember a couple videos ago, I mentioned that in some of my research, I had used some studies that were done by Emily, and she's here today. So I have used her papers in my research for my thesis, and I got to meet the professor that she works with last summer when I was on campus at school. And so I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to have her tell you all about herself, and she's going to give us some great information today. So Emily, over to you. So if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, and no academic stuff yet. Just tell us who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's nice to talk to you today. My name is Emily Bernstein. I'm calling in from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm in my last year of a clinical psychology PhD program at Harvard. So this year I'm completing my clinical internship at the Boston VA Medical Center in Jamaica Plain, or now from my living room during the stay-at-home order. Growing up in Virginia, I was always on team sports, playing volleyball, basketball, soccer, kickball, kind of whatever was going on. And being active and being on teams was always a huge part of my identity. And so thinking about wellness was just always kind of a side interest. Like I loved the wellness part of the New York Times and checking out blogs. And when I got to college, I knew that I wasn't really talented enough to be on a varsity team and keep going with some of these team sports. So I picked up running. It was something that you could take anywhere. I could be as slow or as fast as I was and stay active, really lifelong. And I got hooked. So this is sort of, as we joke in psychology, we say research is me search. So being someone who has always loved exercising myself, studying it didn't really feel like a big stretch.
And so just based on kind of what you told us, sounds like you had a reasonably healthy relationship with sports. As you know, as we've talked about before, lots of the people that watch this channel, probably they sort of are not sure if they're going to define themselves as having a super healthy relationship with sports. So what do you feel, do you have that healthy relationship, or did you ever have a time where it was veering into something that was maybe not quite right?
Yeah, I think largely it's always been a positive for me. I think maybe a period where I had to be more intentional about it and really think about my relationship with exercise and wellness in general came in high school during a period when I actually wasn't on a sports team. I was coming off of having mono, so I couldn't really play soccer, and coming back, I didn't have the structure of someone telling me how much to exercise and when. And so I started doing it on my own. And I really did have to find the right balance in terms of food I was eating, how much I was exercising, what felt good to me, because I'd never had to think about it before. Fortunately, I had a lot of great role models at school and my own family to help me figure it out. But I don't think it was a linear process.
Right. And so it's kind of easy to sort of see, even if you're a casual runner or a casual exerciser, it's easy to see sort of where those lines get blurred of what is too much, what's not enough, and everything you have to do to maintain balance.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've run a few marathons myself, and that was, I think, one of the biggest learning curves was realizing that to be able to run 26 miles, I had to take 2 days off a week.
Yeah.
A lot of days I was running 3 miles, which felt like nothing. And I was so eager to get out there and be strong. And I really did have to learn about how important those break days and those short workout days were for my bigger goals of being strong. Because it was definitely counterintuitive to me, at least at the time. I really had to get educated because I hadn't ever trained like that before.
Right. It is counterintuitive to a lot of us. And even on up and down the chain of sort of shorter distance races or just having certain fitness goals. A lot of people that watch this channel also are fitness competitors, or what I like to call gym athletes. They're people with their training mostly centered in a gym setting. And they also sort of struggle with what you're describing, which is sort of understanding that, you know, periodization of training kind of thing, which is you have to have kind of an on season and an off season. You have to have your rest days, or else the whole show doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
When you were in your psychology program, what sort of, how did those dots connect for you in terms of what you wanted to study?
Yeah. So as an undergraduate, I was fortunate to take a lot of wonderful classes at Yale and to start doing some research with the late, great Susan Nolan Huxema, who one of the giants in clinical psychology, studying depression, emotional disorders, and did a lot of the breakthrough work studying how depression presents in women, looking at things like rumination, which is where you kind of get stuck going over mistakes you've made, going over how you feel, why you feel it. And, you know, this type of reaction to negative experiences is something that we now know is one of the big risk factors for depression, as well as a host of other mental health problems, and can really keep people stuck. So it was through my work with her and her wonderful lab members that I started becoming more interested in emotional health and wanting to study it as an academic, but also work with patients and do clinical work, which is when I decided I wanted to go down the path towards getting my PhD, which would allow me to do both. After I graduated college, before I started my PhD program, I worked for a few years at Mass General Hospital in a wonderful clinical research program, and I had the privilege of working with a number of investigators, one of whom was Dr. Louisa Sylvia, who looked at lifestyle variables like exercise, nutrition, and sleep as it relates to emotional health, specifically doing clinical trials, which is where you give people some sort of treatment and look at how the results compare to a placebo, to nothing, or to some other treatment that we already know is helpful. And it was through that I got to start merging kind of my casual curiosity about wellness with my academic study. And I was just struck by what we were finding in her clinical trials, as well as in sort of the broader literature, that it really just seemed like people who exercise regularly tend to feel better. They tend to say they're less anxious or less depressed. Over their lifetime, they're less likely to develop depression or an anxiety disorder. And for people who are struggling with these problems, there's a lot of great evidence that if you can get people involved in an exercise program, after a few months, it really seems to have a very similar effect to medication, which is just amazing to me. And so for my personal trajectory, when I went to grad school, one of the big questions I had was why, or like how? What is exercise doing to us psychologically or emotionally that leads to these amazing outcomes?
Right.
And can we use those insights to help give people more specific recommendations for what they could be doing? Could we help motivate people to be active if we can tell them what it's really doing for them? And so I was fortunate to be able to start at Harvard in 2014 with Dr. Rich McNally. And he shout out to Rich. And he's been just an amazing teacher, advisor, collaborator on all this work, and really letting me pursue these questions I was so excited about.
Right. And so one of the interesting things about your research is that your research speaks to sort of the broader population of not only the US, but kind of globally. I would say it's almost universal, some of the ways in which your research would help a much wider population than probably the population that watches this channel. And people who do watch me on the regular know that I usually say that our group, we are the outliers. Most of the common types of guidance that we're going to hear in terms of fitness recommendation, nutrition recommendation, and so forth doesn't really apply to us. And we sort of have our own sort of language. So the work that you've done, you have a bunch, well, you have three studies in particular that I used for my research. But I was wondering if you could tell us about the work that you've done and the research that you've done, and try to, if you could, position it toward this sort of outlier population, in the sense that if there's a way to have your results speak to this group for whom that information might not be intuitively linked, what can we say by looking at your research for this kind of odd population?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's something we should always be asking with any type of research. You should always be paying attention to who was involved in the studies. We've seen in other areas of medicine that problems happen when we assume that results in men will translate to women, or studies in college students will apply to the elderly. So yeah, I think that's a really important question. And it is important to note that my research has been examining sort of general population. And the stance that a lot of people in this space take is sort of similar to what you were saying, which is we're coming from the perspective that, we want to help people who aren't exercising. We know that being sedentary is unhealthy. So how can we get people moving? And there's not a lot of talk on sort of the other end, which is like, when are you doing enough? Because we assume, especially coming from the American perspective, that, well, the problem is that people aren't doing enough.
Right.
And we don't really think about where the ceiling is. So maybe I could tell you a little bit about the studies that we've done, and how I think it might speak to that idea of what is enough.
Or what is too much, right?
Or what is too much.
Yeah. For our purposes, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess kind of broadly, the approach that I've taken is trying to understand, what exercise is doing for us emotionally. What role is it playing in our emotional health? And so I think a lot of people think about exercise as this tool for boosting your mood, right? We often talk about like, oh, I just had a bad day, I need to go for a run. We think about exercise like kind of like a Tylenol you can pop, right? And if it's a really stressful period, well, you gotta exercise more, you gotta up that dose to make you feel better. But as I started digging into the literature and doing my work, it just felt like that really didn't fit the problem. That in my own studies, as well as other people's, we find that that's not consistently true, that a lot of people don't feel better right after their exercise. In fact, some people feel worse. And I'm sure a lot of us here can relate that some days you go out and it's a bad run or a bad weightlifting session and you are feeling just tired, or you can't get things out of your head. And so you're not feeling better, and doing more isn't going to change that. And yet, despite that, people overall are doing better when they exercise. So my thought was, what if we flipped it? Rather than exercise being Tylenol, what if it's more like a vitamin? What if it's something that you're taking that helps you just generally better weather things? It makes you more resilient, more prepared. So kind of with that, you might think about dosing differently, because it's not in proportion to the problem. It's not like you had a super bad day, so you should exercise a lot more. And it's also not like you're putting sort of a patch on a problem where you need to keep increasing the dose because you're building this tolerance. Instead, it's like you take the same vitamin every single day, and it just kind of generally keeps you feeling a little bit better.
I love this. Sorry, just to say, that's the coolest thing. I love that idea about it's not a Tylenol, it's a vitamin. And of course, for any of us who take vitamins, I guess it's okay if you skip a few days too, right?
Exactly. Because it's the cumulative effect. We're really, if the case that like going for a walk when you're having an argument with someone makes you feel better, great, go for that walk. But we're not looking for any one dose of exercise to be the thing that fixes a problem. It's sort of the overall pattern that if you're generally exercising, this should help.
I love that cumulative effect. So that exercise or movement exists in your life in some way, fairly consistently, that is enough to have an effect on your mood in general, right?
And that's the thought. So the way we've sort of come to that idea is three different approaches we've taken in our research. So the first is surveys, which is just asking people some questions. And we found that, yeah, people in the general population who are exercising regularly, which, means at least a few days a week for at least half an hour at a time, those people tended to report not only better mood, but also better emotion regulation, which is
I was
sort
going
of,
to ask you to define that. Yeah, tell us what you mean by emotional regulation exactly, so we kind of understand, because that fits into most of your work. So yeah.
so this is starting to get at the how or the why question. So emotion regulation broadly refers to your ability to kind of respond in a healthy way to your emotions. So can you make an emotion less intense if it's too intense? Can you change your surroundings to help you refocus if you're too distressed? Can you do things to essentially cope with what comes your way? And there are so many different emotion regulation strategies or topics that I won't go into.
We
But
can
just,
touch on a few of those later, but yeah.
yeah, but it broadly gets at this idea that maybe people who are exercising are just reacting better to their environments. That when things come at them, when their mood changes, can you deal with it? And that might be the reason why they're having better outcomes. So this gave us, enough of a green light to do some more rigorous research and kind of see if this actually played out with stressors that we could measure. And so we did a series of studies in the lab where we had people be randomly assigned to either do some sort of exercise. We did one with jogging, one with biking, or they were randomly assigned to do nothing, which could mean just sitting or it could mean stretching.
And how long were those periods of exercise in this study?
Just 20 to 30 minutes. And I'd love to tell you about why that as well. So we picked that amount because in sort of people who study cognition or things like memory, thinking, reaction speeds, they found that just 20 to 30 minutes of moderate aerobic activity is enough to get a boost.
So it's moderate aerobic activity that would be sort of, you can still have a conversation, right? You can still, okay.
Exactly, yeah. And so since we thought that cognition, how you were thinking about your experiences and responding to them, could be part of the picture, that seemed like a good amount to test. And it wouldn't be so intense or aversive that people would need a huge amount of recovery time, since we didn't want to keep people in the lab too long, because that's aggravating in and of itself.
Right.
So we were interested in, again, not whether or not exercise would make you feel better afterwards, but whether exercise before things happened could actually help you deal with them later. And so after people either exercised or did a comparison inactive activity, we gave them a stressor. And we've done a whole different, all different types of these. This could be things like surprising them with a speech that they had to do in front of an audience that wasn't very friendly. This
Sounds
is
like a reality show.
terrible. We did one where we showed people a really sad film clip. We had people try to solve riddles or word problems where every third one actually didn't have a solution. Things to make people feel stressed, upset, or frustrated in different ways. And then we looked at what happened after. And what was really interesting was sort of consistent with our hypotheses. We found that the groups didn't differ in how they felt after their activity. So people who had exercised weren't feeling better after compared to the people who stretched. And we also found that there was no difference in how people initially reacted to the stressor. So after the speech task, whether you exercised or stretched, you were just as stressed out, or you were just as sad after the film clip. The difference came in the period afterwards when we're looking at recovery or regulation. And what we found was among those people who were initially struggling to feel better, had they exercised before, they got the boost and they were able to come back to baseline and feel better a lot faster than their counterparts who had stretched.
So just to make that clear, it didn't prevent them from feeling the same emotional response, but
Mhm.
it did allow them to snap back to sort of a baseline neutral emotion quicker.
Exactly.
Okay. And all this, ladies and gentlemen, for just 20 to 30 minutes. Okay.
Exactly.
Um,
Right. And so this would be consistent with these sort of surveys that try to capture people's experience over the past month or even their lifetime, saying that, yeah, if I'm a regular exerciser, I'm the person who says that I can cope with things that bother me, that I don't get stuck in negative emotions for that long, I'm regulating okay.
and getting stuck in that negative emotion part, that's what you were referring to before about that sort of rumination piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that sometimes when we get in a loop of, say, negative thoughts, that this is an example of a place where even that 20 minutes would allow us to sort of maybe veer out of that loop of negative rumination, circular thinking, maybe quicker. Yeah?
Yeah, or at least buffer against the effects.
Okay.
You'd expect that someone who's stuck in this loop is going to feel pretty bad because it doesn't, it's sort of intuitive. It doesn't feel good to be in a loop thinking about how bad you feel and the consequences of feeling bad and why you always feel bad. But if you exercised kind of before this loop started, it seems like you're less impacted, at least, by the loop,
Right. Right.
which might make it easier to work on the assignment you have due or to go out and have a nice lunch with your friends, that it might not be as damaging.
So just to reiterate, what you're saying is that this allows you to go out and live your life, live a fuller life, and participate in activities that are going to sort of bolster the rest of your life. Being with friends, enjoying time with others, getting out, going to have a meal when the pandemic is over. But in general, it helps you go ahead and live your life in a fuller way, right?
That's the, yeah, because that's, as a clinical psychologist, when we talk about emotional health, that's what we're imagining. So not the absence of negative emotions, but rather function. Are you doing things that matter to you? Are you having positive experiences?
Right. So not are you able to run more, right? So, meaning that if having this positive emotional regulation is not so that we can continue to add to that training, what we're saying for my population, it's more about the fact that having this sort of moderate amount of training still allows us to turn around and now go and live our lives and be successful at that in probably a broader way.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, something we need to study more, but something that seems relevant here is the fact that there's probably a U-shaped curve for the benefits of exercise, like a lot of things, where, as I said before, we know that if you're at the bottom end, you're not exercising at all, or you're never eating vegetables, or you're not getting any sleep. We know that those things aren't good for you, right? If you've looked at any blog, any newspaper, any magazine for the past decade, you would know that to be true. And so we generally want people to start working their way up the curve, right? That if you're just getting started, like, yes, 5 minutes of walking is a great place to start. I'd love you to get up to that 20, 30-minute mark because there's evidence that there's something cool that's happening around there that starts giving you some immediate benefits. And sort of accumulating those over time seems to be really helpful.
Right.
But we also think that, you hit that peak and there's an area up here of what we call regular exercise. That's great. But you could imagine then going over the other side of the curve where you're overdoing it. And one way to think about it is in terms of biologically what exercise is doing. Exercise is fascinating in that it is touching most systems in our bodies. It's doing a lot.
Right.
One way that it seems to help is that it actually activates your body's stress response. So your body interprets exercise as stress that it needs to adapt to. And keeping that system going, having to react, adapt, come back to baseline, and do it again periodically is really good for you. Right? People don't do well if they are never stressed.
Right.
Because you're not prepared to handle anything. But what we're also not good at is being chronically stressed. If you are in a perpetual state of stress, such as living in a dangerous area, right, or being food deprived, something where you're constantly on alert, kind of fight or flight, when that is prolonged, it is really taxing on your body because you're just consistently trying to adapt and kind of fight, and you never get that return to homeostasis. So instead of it being this kind of healthy cycle, you sort of get stuck at one edge of it and never really get to recover. And again, kind of coming back to why I think exercise is helpful, if it has to do with being able to feel the feelings and then balance the feelings, that requires cognitive resources, right? But if you are totally wiped all the time, you're not really going to have a lot of resources left. So it's hard to imagine that you're getting the same effect from exercise after 20, 30 minutes that you are after 6 hours. We wouldn't really, in my world, think about those as comparable interventions.
That's important. They don't, for a translation in regular people terms, would be those two things are not the same, right? 30 minutes of moderate exercise and 6 hours of exercise. You, in your clinical experience and also in your research, would not see those two things as equal in terms of what they're going to do to the body and the mind. Is that correct?
I would highly doubt it.
Okay.
As a scientist, I can't say for sure because I've not done the study. I haven't seen the study. But it's just really hard to imagine that those would be the same thing because they demand such different things from your body. They demand different types of attention and focus. And so it's likely that they're having really different effects on you afterwards. Right? Another piece I think that's important here is that exercise isn't a magic bullet, and really nothing is. One study I have that I think speaks a bit to this was trying to take our findings from the lab into the real world. And we gave people an app on their cell phones that asked them to tell us how they were feeling 6 times a day for 3 weeks. And what we found was people who are exercising more regularly, again, that zone of at least a few times a week for 30 to 60 minutes, those people were bouncing back from strong emotions faster. Again, coming back to baseline or homeostasis. So they were feeling anxiety, but then they'd come back. They were feeling really relaxed, and then they'd come back. And so they have this nice, kind of smoother wave. People who are exercising less, again, seems like they would kind of get stuck. So if something triggered anxiety and they were up here, they would kind of stay up here for a lot longer. What we didn't find, though, was that the exercisers were any less likely to get really stressed, right? And they also were not getting less stressed than their peers. It's not that their peaks were lower or less likely to happen. So again, exercise is helping maybe with weathering things that come at you, but it doesn't change the fact that you're gonna feel bad sometimes, which is why you need to think about exercise as one tool in your toolkit, so to speak, right? That it's not gonna prevent you from being really anxious about an exam you have or being really upset if you're in a fight with a loved one. And so there are other things you can think about that help you feel good that you can draw on. Right? So for example, maintaining relationships. Social support is one of the best tools we as people have, which can also kind of help buffer some of these things coming at you during your life. I've mentioned this already, but getting good sleep.
Yeah.
In fact, this is sort of my dirty secret, but if a patient ever asks me, should I try to get a good night's sleep or should I sacrifice sleep to get in a workout? I always say sleep. Like, sleep is sort of the number one thing that we need. There are also things you can do, like just checking yourself for negative or critical thoughts, right? Like beating yourself up doesn't feel good, and no amount of exercise is going to make you feel less bad when you say something nasty to yourself. So I think, as scientists, we're always looking for that one thing we can do to help people because it's simple, it's elegant, and it would make such a big difference. But I just don't think it's out there.
Just not
Instead,
right.
instead it's finding a balance of things that help keep you balanced. And I think exercise is no exception.
So you said to me when we talked the first time, you said something really amazing, which I loved, which was that the goal is not to not feel emotions. Can you say a few more words about that?
Yeah. Something I love about our findings is just what you said, which is that it wasn't that exercise prevented people from feeling negative emotions. It instead helped them recover. And that's, as a psychologist, what I would love to see in everyone that I work with and what I hope to see even in myself, which is we don't want to prevent people from having feelings, that there are really important evolutionary reasons why we feel sad and anxious and afraid and angry and guilty and disgusted. And it would be pretty bad if you stopped feeling any one of those. Right? Like the classic example is if you were never afraid, you would walk into traffic. Right? That would be pretty bad.
Yeah.
And if you were never disgusted, you would drink spoiled milk.
Yeah.
We don't want you not to feel these emotions, but I also don't want anyone getting stuck in them. So you want to have these feelings come up in ways that help you, right? So anxiety tells you, pay attention, something's coming, be prepared. And I want you to feel that so that you can be prepared. But I also wouldn't want you to be so anxious that you can't live your life and that you can't do the things that you want to do and are preparing for. Similarly, sadness, tells you to take a pause and to grieve. You've lost something important. How can you pull yourself together and reflect on what's important and come up with a game plan? Right? Sadness also tells you to gather people around you for support. You need that pause and you need that reflection to be able to adeptly move forward. What you can see is if you never take the next step where you move forward from these things or act on them, they stop being helpful. Or if it's really, really intense to the point that you can't think about anything else, it's also not helpful. So I like to think about exercise as one of those things that could help you manage strong emotions, make them work for you, rather than kind of fighting them.
So right now, lots of people are going outside to do more running, more walking. Lots of people have home gyms, are adding to their workouts, they're adding to their time because they are just feeling so much anxiety and so much nervous energy that they feel compelled to just keep moving in any way available to them that might be different from what they were doing before. So can you say, in your opinion, if knowing what we know about the work that you do and also just your experience as a clinician, how would you suggest that a population that like we have here with our community should sort of view exercise in this particular moment in terms of mental health management?
Mm-hmm. So one thing, again, sort of coming back to emotions and stress, is that they work for us when they kind of fit the facts, right? Like,
That's very interesting.
it makes sense to be really sad when you lose someone really close to you, and you should probably be less sad if you burn the sandwich you were hoping to have for lunch, right? So it can make you sad, but like different degrees.
Right.
And so I think it's important for everyone to just note that we are under extraordinary circumstances right now. And so to have your kind of emotions be elevated or intensified right now fits the facts. So it's really normal. What that looks like differs between people. For some people, it's anxiety, others it's irritability, some it's kind of a swirl of a lot of different things. So one piece is kind of being kind to yourself and sort of accepting that these are really strange times and this is your body or your mind trying to help you kind of cope with it. These emotions are telling you, hey, we're trying to cope here. And sort of bringing in the exercise with the kindness piece, remembering that the goal, if you're thinking about exercise as one of your tools for emotional health, the point isn't not to feel those emotions, right? So you're not going to stop being stressed about a pandemic by adding to your exercise routine. Exercise in some amount will probably help you cope a bit. It helps me, but it's not going to solve the problem because we're still in a pandemic. I think that's one piece.
Yeah. So adding more is not going to, it is not appropriate to add more, even though we're feeling more, is that a good summation of what sort of that is?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that a longer workout will, again, just solve the stress that you're under.
Based on your experience and the research and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we haven't really found a magic dose. In our studies, we didn't directly test this, but in one study we did 20 minutes, in one study we did 30 minutes, in one study we just looked at what people were doing naturally. And within this range of what we call moderate regular exercise, the pattern of results stayed the same. And it didn't really matter how regularly you were exercising within that for how our in-lab activity helped you, which suggests that, going from, 30 minutes to 35 minutes, how much of a difference that's going to make, we don't know, but it doesn't seem like adding hours will really be the thing. Something I think about this period of time that strikes me, and you mentioned this with, people's routines being disrupted, that I think, could potentially be an opportunity, is to think about flexibility. And that's a really big theme in clinical psychology and mental health, that we want people to be flexible. I'm looking at emotional flexibility, like, can your emotions go up and can they come down? That's flexible reactions. But we also want people to be flexible in the tools that they use. Right? So, in therapy, for example, we teach a lot of different skills because no one is going to work every time. And we know this is not as much my area, but people who study exercise physiology, have shown that doing the same type of exercise for the same amount of time in the same way every single day doesn't afford some greater benefit. In fact, changing things up, going longer one day, shorter the next, taking a break, trying different things, that can actually be really good for you. Right? It sort of sharpens your mind to change things up. It can be fun. And so this is a moment maybe to think about that.
So that if one thing is not available to you, maybe either the type, maybe the duration, right? The intensity, the sort of opportunity to do any exercise at all, those things might vary by day. And so what you're saying is that can actually be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, our whole lifestyles have been disrupted right now. We're not, our routines aren't the same. You're not going to work, you're not going places, your daily movements and rhythms have changed a lot. So expecting sort of to feel the same is kind of, we wouldn't expect people to feel the same when their daily rhythms are off. So it's a time to kind of reflect on small things that from your typical life tend to make you feel good, and how can you identify those things and keep doing them in small ways, sort of, again, like accumulating those positives. So if Some exercise is a piece of that. That's great. But are there other things too? Can you keep trying to get good sleep? Can you connect with people in different ways? Can you let yourself recover and kind of savor the relaxation at home? Drawing on these different tools and having a balance of them seems to be kind of the most helpful prescription. And part of that is trying out different things and seeing what works for you, what combination.
That's one of the things that we talked about last week on a video I did on this channel, and I think I mentioned it to you, was that I invited folks to try to consider doing some journaling, like a 5-minute journal prompt that sort of helps you sort of link different behaviors that you will or will not do during the day with an intention to sort of help you work on a goal that you might have. And then just a quick, no frills, whatever app you like, or no app at all, like a 10-minute meditation. Just because I chose 2 things that I knew there was a ton of literature on that I could pull from and talk about. And so what are your thoughts on meditation and journaling, things like that, other maybe alternatives, other tools that people might find helpful in times of increased stress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the word intention. I think that's so big with all of that, is setting aside time to do things with intention that are for you, and also being intentional in kind of going about your day and noticing kind of how things are going. So yeah, like journaling, kind of labeling how you feel can be really helpful, can help you sit with it a bit. Meditation is something that I find very difficult, and I still practice.
I'm so bad at it. Yeah.
My strategy has been, because I'm just not someone who can sit and do formal meditation. I have tried, it's just not for me, and that's okay. But what I prefer doing is short, small mindfulness breaks throughout the day. Like I love having a little sticky note above my sink, reminding me to breathe, so that when I wash my hands, I just take a few calming breaths, so low and slow through my stomach. And I, again, accumulate those throughout the day, and it kind of helps cool me off periodically. I mentioned this before, but sort of checking your thoughts can be really powerful, that we don't often pay attention to the things we're saying to ourselves. Right? And if you pay attention, you might start noticing that you have certain habits of thinking that are making an already difficult period harder for you. Maybe like being critical of yourself, making assumptions about other people and what they think of you.
Why do we do this more when we're stressed in general, as a side note? Why is there more chatter when everything else is already bad? Why do we just it seems like we like to just add a little more gas on the fire. There's just more chatter. Why does that happen?
Yeah. So we know that the way we feel, like physically and emotionally, is really tightly connected to how we think and how we act. And those relationships are bidirectional, meaning how you feel influences your thoughts, and how you think influences how you feel. Right? So as an experiential explanation, imagine that you are walking down the sidewalk and you wave to a friend and they don't wave back. Right? Like there are a lot of explanations you could come up with, right? Like, oh, they just didn't see me. That's embarrassing. You might think, are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Or you might think, what an asshole.
Yeah.
And those 3 thoughts could have really different influences on how you feel and how you treat that person in the future. So now imagine walking down that street and you are running late for work. You didn't have time for breakfast, so you're super hungry. It's like 90 degrees over the summer. You're hot. You're going to be late for a presentation. Are you more likely to think, oh, they just didn't see me? Or are you more likely to think, frickin' jerk?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Instead, if it's a nice spring day and you got a great night's sleep and it's the weekend and you walk by someone, you might have a better chance of letting them off the hook and thinking maybe they just didn't see you.
So is that resilience piece again? That's sort of like letting things roll off your back better in that situation. Is that sort of part of it, or?
Yeah, so you might imagine someone who, yeah, is more emotionally flexible or rolls off your back. Kind of, if you're feeling annoyed by it or like embarrassed with yourself, you might get over it faster. But another strategy can be to look at the thought itself and try to catch it, right? If you notice that thinking this person is a total jerk is getting you all riled up and distracting you from remembering the notes for your presentation, maybe you want to check that thought and be like, okay, are there any other possibilities? Like, yes, it's possible they're a jerk, but is it also possible they just didn't see me? And is there another way I can look at this that would make it easier to keep trucking to work and make it and do the things that I have to do? Because ruminating about how nasty my friend is making this a lot harder.
I would love to ask 8 million questions about how this would translate into rumination about our self-image and what we think of body image, and that would be a whole other conversation. So maybe we should shelve that one so that it's not a million hours on this call. But I did want to ask you, for your personal experience. So how does what you studied and how does what the research that you've done and become aware of, how does it inform how you sort of go about your life in terms of your relationship to fitness or your relationship, maybe even sort of how you view other people in this way? How does that inform all of that?
Yeah, I think it's helped me a lot. You know, in one way, it's helped with kindness and balance. Coming back to what you said earlier, is that I know the importance of days off and letting my body recover to get some of these benefits. Um, it also makes me really value those days that I have a really quick workout. And it also means that I think about why exercise is important to me. It's important to me to feel healthy and strong and to be able to cope with kind of the demands and surprises of life. So in my own life, I really do prioritize exercise as part of everything I do. When I think about my relationships, I know that it makes me a better friend and wife and sister and daughter. When I think about the work that I do, I think that my activity helps me think more sharply, remember more, kind of be more on top of things. And so I do think about my exercise routines as, part of all my identities, and they all work together in important ways. The same way that if I'm not happy in my personal life, my work is going to suffer, right? These are all kind of equal pieces of the puzzle, which means that on days that, I have a big talk at a conference, I might not have time to go run 5 miles, but if I do have 15 minutes to go take a walk before, I'm going to do it because I trust my research, which suggests that I'll be able to handle the stress of talking to a big audience better. So I'm not a big public speaker. So I really do use my research. Bless you. I do use my research in that way. And I, again, think that it's valuable. I think if you'd asked me 10 years ago, is a 15-minute walk or 10 minutes on the elliptical going to do anything? I'd have been like, no, you should just skip that day. Like, that's not anything. Now I'm like, no, that could actually be really great for me.
It's enough, right? Sometimes.
Yeah. And so I think for me, it's helped keep me motivated. Boston winters are long and dark and cold.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Remembering that, keeping up this activity, even when I don't feel like it, will make me feel better that day. That helps me get out of bed. And also, it helps me moderate because I know that it's not everything. And that if it's at the expense of spending time with my loved ones or using the other tools in my toolkit, it's going to stop helping. Because if exercise can help you feel better, that's great. But if you're then doing it in a way that makes you also feel worse, it cancels itself out. Makes sense.
That is awesome. And kind of a good place. I feel like it's a natural place to sort of finish up. I would ask you if there's any other thoughts that you wanted to add or tell us about, but I just am so blown away by everything you said. I know I personally am going to listen to this a few times. There's so many good nuggets in here. I hope that everyone else does take the time to listen a few times. There's some really amazing things that you said. Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with before we say goodbye?
One thing I might say, if you're thinking about changing how you exercise, to remember to be kind to yourself and patient with yourself during that change, because as people, change is uncomfortable, even if where you're going is a good direction, right? You can think about if you are a right-handed person and you're used to brushing your teeth with your right hand in the same way every day, and you try to switch hands and do it in a different order, it's going to feel really, really weird at first. But if you keep doing it, it'll start to feel normal. And you can think about exercise as a similar kind of habit, where if you start cutting down, you might feel really weird at first. And it might be anxiety provoking. Might feel strange. But be kind with yourself. Know that's part of the process, and that if you're working towards something that you value, that's meaningful to you, that it's worth it to tolerate that discomfort because it's short term.
Amazing. And why? Because we trust the research, because she said it. You heard what she said? She said, now why do you do this way? Because I trust my research. Honestly, could not have said it better myself. Amazing. Thank you so much. Stay where you are. I'm going to say goodbye to all of you. Thank you for watching this. Leave comment below. Send me an email, at caseofthejills@gmail.com. Hope you're all well. Stay safe. Wash your hands. I love you. Bye.